What if you could walk through the front door of your home and be greeted not by a loyal dog or a purring cat, but by a full-grown lion? Imagine the sound of its deep, rumbling growl echoing through marble halls, its powerful presence a living, breathing symbol of wealth and influence. This wasn't some wild fantasy, it was reality for the wealthiest citizens of ancient Rome. We often think of the Romans as builders, conquerors, and lawmakers, but behind the grand arches and political debates, there existed a world of almost unbelievable extravagance. And nowhere was that extravagance more vividly on display than in the animals these powerful individuals chose to share their homes with. These weren't just pets, they were statements. They were living treasures, exotic symbols of status that whispered of far-off lands, untamed wilderness, and the sheer power required to bring it all to heel. Today we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's most fascinating and bizarre trends, the exotic pets of wealthy Romans. This is a journey into a world where cheetahs lounged in sun-drenched gardens, where parrots from India recited poetry in Latin, and where owning a bear was less about having a guard animal and more about showing your neighbors that you could. We'll explore the incredible lengths these individuals went to in order to acquire these animals, the shocking costs involved, and what these unusual companions revealed about the Roman obsession with power, spectacle, and the exotic. This story is about more than just strange choices in animal companionship. It's a window into the Roman mind, into a culture that saw the entire known world as a marketplace for its amusement and ambition. So why did a senator feel the need to keep a giraffe in his villa? What did it mean when an emperor presented his favorite lion with a jeweled collar? The answers are as surprising as the pets themselves, touching on everything from politics and economics to mythology and personal identity. This is a side of ancient Rome you won't find in most history books, a story woven with threads of wonder, audacity, and a human desire to possess the extraordinary. Get ready to meet the most unusual household members of the ancient world and discover the astonishing truths behind their lives behind closed doors. For the average Roman citizen, a faithful dog to guard the doorstep or a clever cat to keep the grain stores free of mice was the extent of their animal companionship. These creatures were practical, common, and deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, but for the elite, the senators, the generals, the impossibly wealthy merchants, commonality was the very thing to be avoided. Their world was built on a foundation of visible, unmistakable hierarchy, and every aspect of their existence, down to the animals they kept, was meticulously curated to broadcast their station. An exotic pet was far more than a quirky companion. It was a living, breathing emblem of one's reach and influence. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of owning a private jet or a super yacht today. It wasn't merely about the object itself, but about the story it told. A lion from North Africa or a tiger from Persia wasn't just a dangerous predator, it was a testament to one's global connections. It whispered of lucrative contracts with far-flung traders, of political favors called in from provincial governors, and of the immense financial resources required to not only acquire such a beast, but to transport it thousands of miles across treacherous seas and rugged terrain. The journey itself was a monumental undertaking, a logistical nightmare that only the most powerful and well-connected could possibly navigate successfully. This display was deeply intertwined with the expansion of the empire itself. As Rome's legions marched into new territories, they didn't just bring back treasure and slaves, they opened up entirely new trade routes and exposed the Roman world to a breathtaking array of previously unknown flora and fauna. To possess an animal from a freshly conquered land was to directly align oneself with the glory and momentum of Rome's imperial project. It was a way of saying, I have access to the spoils of our empire's greatness. The rarer the animal, the more distant and mysterious its origin, the greater the prestige it conferred upon its owner. A parrot that could speak a few words of Latin was impressive because it came from India, a place that felt almost mythical to the average Roman. A cheetah, perhaps used for hunting, was a symbol of a connection to the exotic East. This obsession with exoticism filtered down into every aspect of elite life, even their social gatherings. Dinner parties were not just for food and conversation, they were competitive theaters of wealth. Imagine the impact when a host could casually lead his guests to a private menagerie, pointing out his personal collection of leopards, rare antelope, or even a cage full of flamingos. The gasps of astonishment, the murmured admiration, this was social currency of the highest order. It was a non-verbal declaration that set the host irrevocably apart from his peers, creating a memorable spectacle that would be gossiped about for weeks. In a society where status was everything, these animals were the ultimate accessories, proving that their owner didn't just have wealth, they had power on a truly global scale. And of all the exotic treasures a Roman could possess, none commanded attention quite like a big cat. The allure of the lion in particular was almost magnetic. Here was the undisputed king of the beasts, a symbol of raw power and royalty across countless cultures. To have one pacing calmly within the confines of your villa was the ultimate flex, a demonstration that you could domesticate the very embodiment of wilderness and authority. It was a literal and metaphorical taming of nature's most formidable force, right there in your own Paris-style garden. Wealthy patricians vied with one another to acquire the most impressive specimens, with massive maned lions from the North African provinces being the most sought-after prizes. The logistics of acquiring such an animal were as staggering as the animal itself. Capturing a healthy lion required teams of experienced hunters, often from regions like Numidia or Mauritania, who knew the terrain and the risks. Then came the nightmarish journey, a weeks-long sea voyage across the Mediterranean in a cramped, dark wooden hold, followed by an overland trek to Rome. The mortality rate for these creatures during transport was horrifically high, which only drove the price for a live, healthy cat to astronomical levels. The cost wasn't just in the coin paid to the trader, it was in the entire infrastructure of capture, specialized handlers, custom-built cages, and transport that only the super elite could possibly finance. This wasn't a simple purchase, it was a complex, high-stakes investment in a living status symbol. Perhaps no one took this obsession to more bizarre extremes than the Emperor Elagabalus, who reigned in the early 3rd century. His reign was a masterclass in extravagance and shock value, and his menagerie was a central part of that theater. Historical accounts, while likely embellished, describe him using his lions and tigers not just as pets, but as novel party accessories. He was said to have startled unsuspecting guests by unleashing his big cats, with their claws supposedly removed to make them less dangerous during dinners for amusement. On a more disturbing note, he was also reported to have used these powerful animals as a form of execution, a terrifying display of his absolute power over life and death. For Elagabalus, these creatures were extensions of his own capricious and terrifying will, but the role of these big cats wasn't confined to private luxury. Their story has a public and far more brutal chapter. The same networks that supplied the private villas of the elite also fed the insatiable demand of the arena. A patrician might enjoy the quiet prestige of a cheetah kept for exotic hunts on his country estate, but that animal's cousins were destined for a much louder and bloodier fate. Cheetahs, leopards, and lions were star attractions in the Venetians, the wild beast hunts that were a staple of public games. To be able to donate dozens or even hundreds of these magnificent creatures to be slaughtered in a single spectacle was perhaps the most powerful public statement of all. It showed the populace that the donor possessed not only vast wealth, but also the global reach to deplete entire landscapes of their most iconic predators for a single afternoon's entertainment. The private pet and the public victim were two sides of the same coin. Both were ultimately possessions, living proof of Rome's power to command the natural world. While the power and prestige of a lion were undeniable, not every wealthy Roman sought a pet that could literally eat them. For those who desired a different kind of exotic companionship, one filled with intelligence, mischief, and a constant source of entertainment, the answer often had a tail, a clever set of hands, and a penchant for chaos. Monkeys, particularly the Barbary macaques from the mountainous regions of North Africa, became one of the most popular and personalized status symbols in a patrician's household. These creatures were the antithesis of the stoic, powerful big cat. They were lively, engaging, and endlessly fascinating. Their appeal was immediate and multifaceted. To the Roman eye, monkeys were walking, chattering caricatures of humanity. Their familiar yet utterly foreign behavior provided a source of endless amusement. Artists and mosaics captured their antics in stunning detail, often depicting them leashing carts, playing with fruit, or simply interacting with their human owners in scenes that felt both domestic and wonderfully strange. A famous mosaic from Pompeii, for instance, shows a monkey dressed in a Phrygian cap, riding on the back of a partridge, a whimsical image that speaks volumes about how these animals were viewed as both pets and performers. Acquiring a Barbary macaque was a significant investment, a clear signal of disposable income. While not as logistically monstrous as transporting a lion, bringing a live monkey across the Mediterranean required careful handling to ensure it arrived in good health and good spirits. They were expensive curiosities, and their presence in a home was a more subtle, but no less effective, mark of sophistication. It showed an appreciation for wit and cleverness over brute force. A host who could produce a trained monkey to perform a trick for his guests was displaying a different kind of power, the power to command not just the wild, but the whimsical. Yet this intelligence came with a significant cost. Anyone who has spent time with a monkey knows that a clever animal is often a destructive one. Ancient sources hint at the challenges these wealthy owners undoubtedly faced. A creature capable of untangling knots and understanding simple commands was also capable of orchestrating elaborate escapes, pilfering precious food from the table, and reducing expensive furnishings to splinters and scraps. The very qualities that made them so entertaining, their curiosity and problem-solving skills, also made them a nightmare to manage within the pristine, orderly confines of a Roman villa. They were living paradoxes, cherished companions who could, in a fit of playful ingenuity, dismantle the very household they were meant to adorn. This duality made the monkey a perfect, if complicated, status symbol. It wasn't just about having the wealth to buy such a creature, it was about having the resources and the patience to manage it. It represented a mastery over a different, more nuanced kind of chaos. Where a lion tamer demonstrated raw courage, a monkey owner demonstrated endless patience and a well-developed sense of humor. Their popularity reveals that the Roman desire for the exotic wasn't solely about projecting imperial power. It was also about seeking a personal connection to the natural world's infinite variety, even if that connection sometimes swung from the drapes and threw your dinner rolls at the guests. While monkeys offered clever chaos and big cats represented raw power, another category of exotic pet appealed to a more refined, almost artistic sensibility, the world of birds. For the Roman elite, filling their homes and gardens with the most extraordinary avian life was about curating a living tapestry of color, sound, and pure, unadulterated spectacle. This wasn't just an addition to the household, it was the creation of an immersive environment designed to dazzle the senses and proclaim a unique kind of cultural sophistication. At the very pinnacle of this feathered hierarchy was the parrot, especially the Indian ringneck species, with its vibrant green plumage and brilliant red beak. To a Roman, this creature was nothing short of a miracle. It wasn't merely a beautiful animal, it was a talking one. The ability of parrots to mimic human speech captivated the Roman imagination, blurring the line between the animal and human worlds in a way that was both thrilling and deeply prestigious. Owning a parrot was like possessing a living jewel that could greet you in Latin. The poet Ovid even wrote about a parrot taught to say the word ave, a greeting that would have astonished every guest who heard it. The journey to acquire one was a testament to vast resources, transported from the distant, almost mythical lands of India via complex trade routes. Each parrot represented a small fortune and a network of connections spanning the known world. Its value wasn't just in its beauty, but in its voice, a constant, chattering reminder of its owner's global reach and refined tastes. If the parrot was the prized conversationalist, the peacock was the silent, stunning supermodel of the Roman garden. Native to parts of the empire but far from common, peacocks were not acquired through difficult importation, but through elaborate and expensive breeding programs. Their appeal was immediate and visceral, the sheer, breathtaking beauty of the male's iridescent tail feathers, which could be fanned out in a display of dazzling, eye-like patterns. To have these birds strutting through a manicured garden was to transform the space into a living painting, a scene of such opulence that it left visitors in awe. But the peacock offered more than just a visual feast. It was a status symbol you could literally serve for dinner. Serving a whole roasted peacock, its feathers expertly reattached for presentation, was the ultimate culinary flex at a banquet, a dish so extravagant it was reserved for the most important guests. The peacock thus served a dual purpose, a living ornament for daily display and the centerpiece of the most exclusive feasts. And then there was the ostrich, the undisputed king of bizarre Roman pets. If you wanted to show that your wealth and taste for the extraordinary knew absolutely no bounds, you bought an ostrich. These enormous flightless birds from North Africa were the definition of novelty. Romans found them utterly fascinating and deeply strange, a creature with a body like a giant feathered barrel, legs like tree trunks, and a head that seemed far too small for its body. Their appeal lay in their complete and total otherness. An ostrich patrolling a wealthy estate was a walking conversation piece, a creature so bizarre it defied easy categorization. But the Roman relationship with the ostrich, as with so many things, had a dark public counterpart. Their strangeness made them a prime attraction in the arena, where they were featured in races or, more horrifically, in executions. The Emperor Commodus famously enjoyed demonstrating his skill by decapitating ostriches with a specially designed arrow in front of a stunned Colosseum crowd, perverting the private fascination with these animals into a grotesque public spectacle. The private ostrich owner, therefore, wasn't just showcasing an exotic animal, they were showcasing a creature whose very existence represented the farthest extremes of the Roman world, from unparalleled luxury to unimaginable brutality. But beyond the chaotic energy of monkeys and the brilliant plumage of exotic birds, some Romans sought a companion that represented something far more profound and enigmatic. Their choice of pet reflected not just a desire for spectacle, but a deep connection to the spiritual and mysterious undercurrents of their world. This brings us to one of the most complex and symbolically loaded animals in the Roman home, the snake. While the idea of keeping a large constrictor like a python or a boa might seem like the ultimate act of daring for many wealthy Romans, these serpents were not merely pets, they were sacred beings, living links to the divine. The connection between snakes and healing was one of the most powerful associations in the Roman world, centered on the cult of Asclepius, the god of medicine. Temples dedicated to Asclepius, known as Asclepians, almost always housed non-venomous snakes that were allowed to roam freely among the sick and injured who came seeking a cure. These snakes were considered the god's earthly representatives, embodiments of his healing power. It was believed that their touch or even their presence could bring about miraculous recoveries. For a wealthy Roman to keep such a serpent in their own home was to invite that divine, healing energy directly into their personal space. It was a powerful statement of piety and a hope for protection against illness, transforming a section of the villa into a private sanctuary. This veneration went even deeper, tying into the very foundation myths of Rome. The lairs, the protective household gods that watched over every Roman family, were profoundly connected to serpentine imagery. A snake appearing in a home was rarely seen as a threat. Instead, it was often interpreted as the law itself, manifesting to bring a blessing or a warning. To deliberately house a beautiful, impressive snake was to actively nurture that protective spirit. It was a way of forging a direct, tangible bond with the guardians of the hearth, ensuring the family's health and prosperity. The snake was both pet and priest, a silent, slithering conduit to the gods. Of course, the sheer presence of the animal itself could not be ignored. A large constrictor, perhaps imported from Egypt or another province, was a creature of mesmerizing beauty and silent power. Its smooth, patterned scales, its unblinking gaze, and its potent, muscular strength commanded a respect that was entirely different from the fear inspired by a lion. This was a quiet, ancient power. To have such a creature coiled contentedly in a specially built enclosure was to demonstrate a mastery over a different kind of wilderness, one associated with wisdom, the underworld, and secrets. It projected an image of the owner as not just wealthy, but deeply knowledgeable, philosophical, and in tune with the oldest and most mysterious forces of nature. The care of such a sacred animal was itself a ritual. Feeding it, ensuring its comfort, and observing its behaviors would have been undertaken with a sense of reverence and purpose. Unlike the monkey whose intelligence was for play or the parrot whose voice was for show, the snake's value was in its being. Its silent, watchful presence added a layer of profound gravity to a household, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the everyday world and the divine. In a culture steeped in signs and omens, the snake was the ultimate omen, one that you could care for, respect, and live alongside, hoping its sacred power would bless everything within its reach. While the sacred silence of a snake offered a connection to the divine, other wealthy Romans sought to craft a different kind of paradise on their own terms, one that was serene, beautiful, and utterly controlled. For these individuals, the ultimate expression of power wasn't about taming a single wild predator, but about reshaping entire landscapes to suit their aesthetic pleasure. This desire gave rise to a truly breathtaking practice, the creation of private game parks or vivaria on their sprawling rural estates. Here, the exotic pet was not a singular creature in a cage, but an entire curated ecosystem, a living painting where graceful, hooved animals like deer, gazelles, and ibex became elegant ornaments in a manufactured wilderness. Imagine the vast, rolling countryside surrounding a luxurious Roman villa. Instead of just vineyards and olive groves, a significant portion of this land would be enclosed by high, sturdy walls. Within these barriers, the owner wasn't raising livestock for slaughter or crops for market. They were engineering an idealized version of nature itself. These enclosures were designed to mimic the natural habitats of these graceful creatures, with carefully managed groves of trees for shade, open meadows for grazing, and even artificial streams. The goal was to create a self-contained world that was both visually stunning and completely separate from the functional agricultural land around it. It was the ancient precursor to the grand country estate gardens of later European nobility, but with a distinctly Roman flair for scale and imposition of will. The animals chosen for these parks were selected specifically for their beauty and grace. Fallow deer, with their spotted coats and elegant leaps, were a particular favorite. They were seen as creatures of myth and woodland beauty, associated with the goddess Diana. To have a herd of them living peacefully on your property was to bring a piece of that mythological elegance directly into your daily view. Alongside them, landowners might introduce gazelles, imported from the North African provinces. Their incredible speed and slender forms added a different kind of movement and exoticism to the landscape. For those seeking something even more dramatic and rugged, the ibex, with its magnificent backward curving horns from mountainous regions, presented a striking symbol of untamed alpine majesty, now peacefully browsing within a Roman noble's enclosed park. The purpose of these vivaria was multifaceted. On one level, they were the ultimate status symbol. The sheer amount of land required to maintain a viable population of these animals was enormous, and the cost of acquiring, transporting, and caring for them was prohibitive for all but the wealthiest. It was a quiet, continuous display of wealth that didn't require a noisy dinner party to be appreciated. The mere existence of the park was statement enough. It showed that the owner possessed so much land and capital that he could dedicate vast swaths of it purely to leisure and visual enjoyment, a concept that would have been unimaginable to the average farmer. This wasn't just about static display, however. These parks were also personal playgrounds for the elite and their guests. One popular pastime was the venatio, but of a far more refined and less bloody variety than the public spectacles in the arena. Owners and their friends would embark on hunts within the safety of their own walls, pursuing the deer or gazelle for sport. This allowed them to demonstrate their martial skill and courage in a completely controlled environment, without the genuine danger of facing a lion or a bear. It was a ritualized, aristocratic sport that reinforced social bonds and celebrated a rustic ideal of Roman virtue, all from the comfort of one's own property. Perhaps most interestingly, these parks served a profound psychological purpose. In a world where Rome was rapidly expanding and urbanizing, there was a growing nostalgia for a romanticized, peaceful natural world. The vivarium allowed the elite to have it both ways. They could enjoy the comforts and security of their civilized villa while looking out their window at a perfectly managed, aesthetically pleasing version of the wild. It was nature stripped of its genuine dangers, its inconveniences, and its unpredictability. The galloping gazelle and the leaping deer were not truly wild. They were performers in a daily show put on for the pleasure of their owner, representing a complete and total mastery over the environment. The message was clear: even nature itself could be bought, enclosed, and made to beautify the domain of Rome's most powerful citizens. But for some of Rome's elite, the ultimate expression of dominance over the natural world wasn't to be found roaming in a park or coiled in a temple, but gliding silently through water. They turned their attention from the land to the sea, embarking on a pursuit that combined immense wealth with an almost poetic sensibility: the collection of exotic, ornamental fish. This was not about aquaculture for food. These were the first elaborate saltwater aquariums, and they became a breathtakingly expensive and bizarre obsession for the super-rich. Men like the generals Lucullus and Hortensius became less famous for their political careers and more renowned for their spectacular and spectacularly costly marble piscine ornamental fish ponds that were the pinnacle of luxurious vanity. These were not simple garden pools, they were massive engineered marvels, often built right on the coast with intricate systems of channels and sluice gates that allowed fresh seawater to circulate continuously, maintaining the perfect environment for their precious saltwater inhabitants. The most lavish examples were lined with precious marble and decorated with sea-themed mosaics, transforming a functional tank into a living work of art. The goal was to create a window into the Mediterranean itself, a private, curated ocean where the owner could watch his collection of living jewels dart and play. The cost of construction was staggering, but it was merely the entry fee. The real expense and the true mark of status was in stocking these aquatic palaces. The most sought-after residents were not fish for eating, but fish for seeing. The parrot wrasse, with its dazzling, almost unreal spectrum of blues, greens, and pinks, was a particular favorite. To capture and transport such a vibrantly colored fish alive was a technological and logistical nightmare, making each successful delivery a minor miracle and a major financial event. But perhaps no aquatic creature captured the Roman imagination quite like the moray eel. These sinuous, powerful predators, with their cold, watchful eyes and gaping jaws, became the ultimate aquatic status symbol. They were mysterious, dangerous, and utterly captivating. Wealthy owners didn't just keep them, they named them, adorned them with jewelry, and treated them like beloved, if terrifying, members of the household. The rivalry between collectors like Lucullus and Hortensius is legendary. They weren't just trying to have a nicer pond than the other. They were engaged in a cold war of piscine one-upmanship, spending fortunes to acquire the rarest, most colorful, or largest specimens. It was said that Hortensius became so attached to his moray eels that he would weep when one fell ill, and he famously hosted lavish dinner parties where the main entertainment was not a poet or a musician, but the feeding of his prized eels. Guests would watch in a mixture of horror and fascination as slaves tossed live fish into the pond, triggering a violent, thrashing feeding frenzy. This was dinner theater of the most macabre order, a display meant to shock and impress to the owner's mastery over such a savage and exotic creature. The irony, of course, was profound. In a city where fresh fish was a valuable commodity for the table, these men were spending more to keep fish alive and on display than most citizens would see in a lifetime. It was consumption in its purest form, wealth converted not into sustenance, but into spectacle. The value of a single jewel-colored wrasse had nothing to do with its nutritional value and everything to do with its scarcity and beauty. This obsession revealed a shift in how the ultra-wealthy related to the world around them. It was no longer enough to conquer land and people. The final frontier was the sea itself, and the ultimate power was to bring a piece of its most elusive and beautiful secrets home to swim in a marble pond for your personal amusement. Yet even among the most brilliant and talkative birds, a different kind of intelligence was prized, one that was less about colorful mimicry and more about cunning, problem-solving, and an almost unsettling awareness. For a certain segment of the Roman elite, the ultimate avian status symbol wasn't a parrot from a distant jungle, but a bird they might see every day, the crow, and more specifically, the raven. These corvids were revered not for their beauty, but for their formidable brains, and owning one was a declaration that you appreciated a more subtle, philosophical kind of wonder. The Roman fascination with these birds was deeply rooted in observation. Anyone who spent time watching crows and ravens could see they were different. They weren't just scavengers, they were strategists. They could solve puzzles, remember human faces for years, and communicate complex ideas to each other. To the Roman mind, this wasn't just animal behavior. It was a form of earthly wisdom, a raw, untamed intelligence that seemed to border on the mystical. This reputation was cemented by writers and natural philosophers, most notably Pliny the Elder, who devoted entire sections of his natural history to chronicling their incredible feats of learning. He didn't just describe them as smart, he presented them as feathered scholars, capable of understanding not just words, but the concepts behind them. The pinnacle of corvid ownership was a bird that could speak, While parrots were famous for it, a talking raven was considered a far greater achievement. The process of training one was a long and patient art undertaken by specialized handlers. The goal wasn't just to have the bird repeat a sound, but to have it associate a specific phrase with a specific event, most famously a greeting. Imagine the scene. A wealthy patron is leading a rival through his villa when a large, glossy black raven, perched elegantly in an atrium, turns its head and clearly intones, "Ave," or salve, "hello," or greetings. The shock value was immense. This was no mere exotic import. It was a local creature transformed into something extraordinary through dedicated cultivation and wealth. It demonstrated that the owner possessed not just the resources to buy rarity, but the patience and sophistication to nurture genius from the seemingly ordinary. Pliny recounts a famous story that captures this obsession perfectly. He tells of a raven owned by a Roman cobbler that became a local celebrity. The bird would stand outside the shop and loudly greet passers-by and customers by name, dramatically boosting the cobbler's business. The tale takes a darker turn when a jealous rival, a shoemaker from a neighboring shop, killed the bird out of envy. The outrage from the public was so fierce that the murderer was ultimately driven from the city, and the raven was given an elaborate public funeral, complete with a procession and a finely decorated bier carried by two Ethiopians. This story, whether entirely true or embellished, underscores the immense cultural value placed on a talking corvid. It wasn't just a pet, it was a public attraction, a source of pride, and its loss was treated as a serious crime against the community. The prestige of owning such a creature was multifaceted. On one level, it was a fantastic novelty, a surefire way to become the talk of every social gathering. But on a deeper level, it resonated with the Roman respect for ingenium, native talent, ingenuity, and innate cleverness. A raven represented ingenuity refined by human training. It was a partnership between wild intelligence and civilized education, a living metaphor for the Roman ideal of mastering the natural world through wisdom and discipline, not just brute force. In a society that valued rhetoric and legal argument above all else, a bird that could master human language was the ultimate symbol of persuasive power, literally given wings. But if a lion was the ultimate symbol of regal authority and a monkey a display of clever chaos, then the bear represented something else entirely, pure, unadulterated, terrifying force. For a wealthy Roman to choose a bear as a pet was perhaps the most audacious and reckless power move imaginable. This wasn't about subtle status or divine connection. It was a blunt, visceral declaration that you had the sheer audacity to domesticate one of the most formidable and unpredictable predators on the continent. While big cats hailed from distant conquered lands, bears were a local terror, a very real and known danger from the forests of Europe and Asia Minor. Bringing one into your home wasn't just importing an exotic creature, it was inviting the wilderness from your own backyard inside and daring it to misbehave. The process of acquiring a bear was a brutal and deadly business. Unlike the coordinated hunts for lions in open plains, capturing a live bear often meant confronting it in its own territory, dense woodlands and mountainous caves. Teams of experienced hunters and trappers, often from provinces like Germania or Dacia, would use immense pit traps or heavy nets, risking life and limb to secure a single animal. The goal was to subdue it without causing fatal injury, a task that required incredible courage and often resulted in severe casualties among the capture teams. The subsequent transport was a nightmare of logistics and constant danger. A bear, even a young one, possesses a strength that is almost incomprehensible. A wooden cage that could hold a lion might be reduced to splinters by an enraged bear. The journey to Rome was a tense, fearful affair for everyone involved, with the ever-present risk of the animal breaking loose. The mortality rate for these creatures in transit was staggering, which meant that every healthy bear that arrived in the city represented a small fortune spent and a significant amount of luck. This immense cost and danger is precisely what made bear ownership so prestigious. Only the most powerful, with bottomless financial resources and access to the best trappers and handlers, could even attempt it. It was a statement that screamed of disposable wealth and a fearless disregard for conventional safety. An emperor like Valentinian was said to have kept two enormous she-bears, named Innocence and Gold Dust, who were reportedly so vicious they had to be chained near his bedroom to guard him. a testament to either immense bravery or a profound disregard for a peaceful night's sleep. For a private citizen, having a bear chained in your courtyard was the equivalent of keeping a live landmine as a lawn ornament. It was the ultimate proof that you lived by a different set of rules, where the thrill of owning such a beast outweighed any rational concern. Of course, many of these bears never saw the inside of a private villa. The same supply chains that fed the eccentric tastes of the elite also fed the insatiable appetite of the arena. Bears were star attractions in the Venetians, the wild beast hunts. Their raw power and terrifying ferocity made them a formidable opponent for hunters, or more commonly, a victim in mass executions where they were pitted against other animals like bulls or packs of dogs. To donate a dozen bears to the games was a powerful public gesture, showcasing one's wealth and connections to the wild frontiers of the empire. Yet, in a bizarre twist that highlights the Roman desire to dominate nature completely, some of these bears were not destined for the blood-soaked sand of the arena. Instead, they were subjected to a different fate: training. There are accounts, some likely exaggerated, of bears being trained to perform human-like tricks. The poet Martial mentions a bear that was taught to feign death, a chilling parody of the deaths its kind suffered just next door in the Colosseum. Other sources speak of bears being forced to walk on their hind legs, dance, or even box while chained. The spectacle of such a powerful, wild creature being forced to perform mundane, almost silly tricks was the pinnacle of Roman control. It wasn't enough to have a bear. The true power was in making it act against its very nature, reducing the king of the forest to a clumsy performer for the amusement of a dinner party. This practice, more than any other, encapsulates the bizarre and complex relationship the Roman elite had with the natural world, a mixture of awe, fear, and an overwhelming compulsion to dominate, even if it meant turning the most fearsome beast into a party clown. And yet, even the lion, the monkey, the bear, and the raven could, in their own ways, be understood by a Roman. They were predators, tricksters, forces of nature, or clever mimics. But in the year 46 BC, Julius Caesar presented Rome with a creature that defied all categorization, an animal so utterly alien it might as well have stepped from the pages of a myth. This was the camelopardalis, a name that tried and failed to combine the known with the unknown. We know it as the giraffe. Its arrival was not a quiet affair for a private villa. It was a public spectacle of such profound weirdness that it instantly became the single greatest symbol of an emperor's power to make the impossible real. Caesar brought the giraffe to Rome following his military campaigns in Egypt and Asia Minor, and he presented it during a series of triumphal games so lavish they were talked about for centuries. To understand the impact, you have to try to see it through Roman eyes. They were familiar with tall animals, they had horses, they knew spotted animals, they had leopards. But this was a creature that looked like it had been stitched together in a dream by a drunken god. It had a body like a deer, but was impossibly larger. It had a neck that reached the treetops, legs that were taller than a man, and a head crowned with two strange skin-covered horns. Its pattern was not the fierce rosettes of a leopard, but a puzzle of irregular brown patches on a lighter background. It moved with a slow, loping, ungainly grace that was completely unnerving. Nothing in their world had prepared them for the giraffe. This was more than just a new animal. It was a living question mark. Romans were masters of taxonomy, of fitting the world into understandable boxes, but the giraffe refused to fit. Was it a kind of camel, a monstrous leopard? The name they gave it, camelopards, reveals their desperate struggle to process what they were seeing by comparing it to two things they already knew, even though the combination made no sense. Its very existence challenged their understanding of nature itself, and that was precisely its power. For Caesar, the giraffe was the ultimate trophy. It wasn't from a nearby province, it was from the very edge of the known world, a place of fable and mystery. To command that such a delicate, improbable creature be captured, endure a months-long sea journey, and arrive alive in the heart of Rome was a logistical and financial feat that screamed of divine-level authority. It proved that Caesar's influence didn't just span continents, it spanned the very limits of human imagination. He didn't keep it as a private pet. Instead, he had it paraded through the streets before being displayed in the arena, where it was likely killed as part of the games. This public execution was the final, darkest part of the statement. It wasn't enough to possess the wonder of the world. True power lay in being able to destroy it before a stunned audience. The giraffe's life was a temporary sacrifice to Caesar's glory. a living testament to his power that was then offered up to prove his ultimate dominance. He could not only bring the unimaginable to their doorstep, but he could also erase it with a wave of his hand. In that one bizarre, beautiful, and ultimately tragic animal, the entire Roman drive for exotic pets reached its zenith, a perfect blend of insatiable curiosity, overwhelming power, and a chilling willingness to consume the world's wonders for a moment's spectacle. Beyond the initial awe of ownership lay a daily reality of immense complication and constant peril. Keeping a leopard in your home was not a simple matter of putting out a bowl of food. It was a never-ending logistical nightmare that required a small army of specialists and a river of money. First and foremost, you needed a bestiarius, a professional animal handler on your permanent payroll. This wasn't a job for a common slave. It was a highly specialized and dangerous profession. The bestiarius was the only person who could safely approach the animal, manage its care, and understand its moods. His expertise was the thin line between a magnificent spectacle and a bloodbath, and his services commanded a premium wage. He was the leopard's keeper, nurse, and jailer all in one, a constant and necessary reminder that this living status symbol was, at its core, a deadly wild predator. Then there was the issue of housing. A simple wooden pen or a rope leash would be laughably inadequate. These animals required custom-built enclosures of formidable strength. We're talking iron bars as thick as a man's wrist, set into solid stone or reinforced concrete frames. The floors had to be durable stone or packed earth, able to withstand constant pacing and digging. The design had to account for the animal's incredible strength, agility, and climbing ability, often requiring a fully enclosed roof. Building such a structure was a major construction project, akin to adding a small, private dungeon to your villa. The cost of materials and skilled labor was astronomical, a continuous financial drain that began the moment the animal arrived and never truly ended. The most relentless expense, however, was the simplest one: food. A leopard is an obligate carnivore, requiring pounds of fresh, raw meat every single day. This wasn't about table scraps or cheap cuts. We're talking high-quality beef, venison, or goat, a constant supply that had to be sourced, butchered, and delivered. In an age without refrigeration, this meant a daily procurement challenge. The financial outlay for this alone would have been enough to feed a large household of human servants for weeks. The absurdity of the situation is staggering. While many Roman citizens worried about the price of grain and bread, a wealthy aristocrat might be spending a fortune daily just to keep his pet leopard's diet suitably luxurious. And all of this investment, all of this careful planning, was perpetually shadowed by the ever-present terrifying risk of escape. No cage was utterly infallible, no handler infallibly attentive. A weakened bar, a forgotten latch, a moment of distraction, that's all it would take. The consequence was not a minor nuisance, it was the stuff of absolute horror. A loose leopard in the confines of a villa, or worse, the crowded streets of Rome, was a waking nightmare. The stories that have come down to us, though perhaps embellished, speak of mauled slaves, terrified guests, and a brutal, panicked response to recapture the animal. The very thing that was a symbol of power could, in an instant, become an agent of chaos and tragedy, turning its owner's home into a hunting ground and his prized possession into a public menace that had to be destroyed. The entire endeavor was a breathtakingly expensive, dangerous, and fundamentally absurd exercise in vanity, a testament to the fact that for Rome's elite, no price was too high and no risk too great in the relentless pursuit of status. This world of exotic pets was never just a private hobby, it was deeply woven into the very fabric of Roman power politics. An animal was more than a living wonder, it was a form of high-stakes currency, a tool for building alliances, rewarding loyalty, and demonstrating one's reach within the complex machinery of the empire. The gifting of a rare beast was a political act, loaded with meaning and intention, a silent language understood by every player in the game. For a provincial governor stationed on the fringes of the empire, sending a rare animal to a powerful senator back in Rome was one of the most effective ways to secure a lucrative future. Imagine a governor in North Africa or Syria. His success depended not just on administering his province, but on maintaining powerful friends in the capital who could advocate for him, protect his interests, and secure him even more prestigious postings after his term ended. A letter praising his administrative skills was fine, but a crate containing a healthy young cheetah or a pair of rare ibex delivered to a senator's doorstep was unforgettable. This was not a bribe of coin, which could be crass and illegal. It was a gift of spectacle, of prestige, a tangible piece of the exotic frontier that the senator could now claim to own. It created a bond of obligation, a debt of gratitude that the senator would be expected to repay with political favors. The animal was a physical manifestation of the governor's influence and resourcefulness in a distant land, proving he was a man of capability and connection worth cultivating. On an even grander scale, emperors mastered this practice, using exotic animals as instruments of foreign policy and imperial patronage. Gifting a lion or a bear to a client king or an allied chieftain on the border was a multifaceted gesture. On one hand, it was a tremendous honor, a sign of personal favor from the emperor himself that would elevate the chieftain's status among his own people. On the other hand, it was a not-so-subtle reminder of Roman power. The message was clear: we possess the might to capture the most fearsome beasts of your own lands and give them to you as gifts. Our reach is limitless. It was a way of dazzling allies while simultaneously underscoring their subordinate status. The animal became a permanent, roaring emblem of Rome's presence in their court. Perhaps the most cynical and calculated use of this practice was as a deliberate distraction. An unpopular emperor facing public discontent or political turmoil might suddenly donate a vast number of exotic animals to the public games. This was a classic strategy of bread and circuses, but with teeth and claws. By flooding the arena with unprecedented numbers of lions, tigers, and bears, the emperor could overwhelm the populace with awe and spectacle, temporarily making them forget their grievances. The public's anger about grain shortages or corrupt officials would be drowned out by the roar of the crowd, watching 100 Nubian lions be hunted in a single afternoon. This act of grandiose generosity was really a tool of control, a way to purchase public favor and stabilize a shaky reign through the calculated sacrifice of the natural world. In this light, the exotic animal was the ultimate political tool, a gift, a threat, a bribe, and a distraction, all contained within a single, magnificent, and often doomed creature. While the wealthiest senators and merchants could aspire to a private lion or a curated game park, the emperor operated on an entirely different plane of existence. His collection was not merely a menagerie, it was a living, breathing map of the empire itself, a physical manifestation of Rome's global dominion contained within the palace walls. The imperial zoo was the ultimate expression of the exotic pet trend, scaled up to a level that was almost incomprehensible, existing solely for the amusement and aggrandizement of the man who ruled the known world. These collections were less like a zoo and more like a walking, roaring encyclopedia of conquest. Every new territory absorbed into the empire offered up its most magnificent fauna as tribute. A governor in Egypt would send a crate containing a pair of agile cheetahs. A legate stationed in Syria might arrange for the delivery of a rare Syrian brown bear. Traders seeking favor would present a brilliantly plumed bird from the farthest reaches of India. The emperor's palace grounds became the final destination for every strange and wonderful creature the Roman world could provide, each animal a testament to the reach of his authority and the loyalty of his subordinates. To walk through this collection was to take a tour of the empire without ever leaving Rome, each enclosure representing a different province, a different people, now all subject to the emperor's gaze. The logistical operation behind this living collection was a monumental undertaking, a silent army of handlers, veterinarians, and keepers working constantly to maintain this microcosm of the world. An entire wing of the palace bureaucracy would have been dedicated solely to the acquisition, transport, and care of these animals. Specialized besharai, the most skilled handlers in the world, were responsible for the dangerous predators, while teams of grooms tended to the hoofed animals and aviaries required expert keepers to maintain the health of delicate birds. The cost of feeding this assembly was staggering, a constant drain on the imperial treasury that would have fed thousands of citizens, a fact that was likely of little concern to an emperor who saw it as his divine right to possess the world's wonders. For the emperor, this private zoo served multiple purposes. On one level, it was the ultimate personal amusement. He could stroll through the grounds, enjoying the sight of a tiger from Persia or listening to the chatter of monkeys from Africa, all for his private enjoyment. But on a much more calculated level, it was a tool of power. When foreign ambassadors or rival chieftains were granted an audience, they would often be led through these grounds. The message was unmistakable and brutal. See these animals, they come from lands even farther away than your own. They all bow to me, so too should you. It was psychological warfare, a non-verbal demonstration of reach and resource designed to intimidate and awe visitors into submission. Perhaps no emperor exemplified this more than Elagabalus, whose relationship with his menagerie was legendary for its bizarre extravagance. His collection was not for quiet contemplation, it was a source of shock and spectacle. He was said to have hosted dinners where he would suddenly release tamed lions and leopards among his guests, purely to enjoy their terror, assured by his handlers that the animals' claws had been removed to prevent serious injury. He reportedly used his elephants and camels not as noble beasts of burden, but as common draft animals to pull his chariot through the streets for trivial errands, a display meant to show that even the most majestic creatures were mere playthings to him. For Elagabalus, the imperial zoo was an extension of his own chaotic and transgressive personality, a place where the normal rules of nature and society were suspended to suit his whims. This imperial practice had a direct and profound trickle-down effect on the rest of Roman aristocracy. The emperor's obsession set the standard for luxury, creating a competitive culture among the elite. If the emperor had a giraffe, a wealthy senator might feel compelled to acquire a rare breed of antelope. If the palace grounds featured a pool of exotic moray eels, an influential general might invest in his own elaborate piscina. The imperial zoo was the trendsetter, its contents the ultimate wish list for every ambitious Roman of means. It created a market, spurred innovation in animal handling, and normalized the idea that owning a piece of the wild was synonymous with power. The emperor's private collection was the sun around which the entire bizarre solar system of Roman exotic pet ownership revolved, its gravitational pull dictating the desires and expenditures of the entire elite class. But even amidst this spectacle of power and possession, not every voice in Rome sang in praise. A growing chorus of dissent began to rise, primarily from the Stoic philosophers who saw this obsession not as a symbol of strength, but as a profound moral decay. They viewed the entire practice as a grotesque perversion of humanity's relationship with the natural world, a dangerous extravagance that corrupted the individual and weakened the very fabric of the state. The most prominent of these critical voices belonged to Seneca the Younger, a Stoic thinker and advisor to the Emperor Nero, who used his powerful writing to condemn what he saw as a catastrophic waste. Seneca argued that this desperate search for novelty, this need to possess the rare and the exotic, was a clear symptom of a diseased mind. He believed that a person who was morally and intellectually sound would find endless fascination and contentment in the natural world immediately around them. The flight of a common sparrow, the industry of ants, the changing of the seasons. The need to cage a leopard, in his view, stemmed from a deep inner emptiness, a boredom that no amount of external spectacle could ever truly fill. He saw the lavish villas with their private menageries not as palaces of wonder, but as prisons for both the animals and the souls of the men who owned them, who were themselves enslaved by their own insatiable desires. The criticism went far beyond personal morality and struck at the very heart of Roman identity and resource allocation. These philosophers asked a blunt and damning question: what was the real cost of this vanity, the immense fortune spent to capture a single lion, to build its marble enclosure, and to feed it prime cuts of meat represented resources that could have built aqueducts to bring fresh water to a city, granaries to prevent famine, or ships to secure the grain supply from Egypt. They saw it as a catastrophic misdirection of wealth and energy, a sign that Rome's elite had forgotten their duty to the state and its people in favor of their own personal amusement. The practice was viewed as a soft vice that eroded the traditional Roman virtues of frugality, discipline, and civic responsibility, replacing them with a dangerous addiction to luxury and spectacle. This philosophical backlash was part of a larger cultural narrative that saw the empire's expansion and resulting wealth as a corrupting force. Traditionalists harkened back to a mythologized past when Romans were tough, simple farmers and soldiers, in tune with the land and their community. The exotic pet, arriving via complex trade routes from conquered territories, became a potent symbol of everything that was wrong with the new Rome. It was foreign, it was luxurious, it was unnecessary, and it was a constant reminder of the vast inequality that now defined the empire. The caged bear in a senator's garden wasn't just a bear, it was proof of how far Rome had strayed from its founding principles, a living, breathing emblem of its decadence and disconnect. Yet for all the care and expense lavished upon them, the fate of many of these exotic creatures was not a peaceful retirement in a gilded cage. The same culture that prized them as living treasures also possessed a chillingly utilitarian view of their value, and when an animal became too large, too dangerous, too expensive to maintain, or simply ceased to be a novel amusement, its purpose could shift in a brutal and heartbreaking instant. The grand villas and imperial palaces were not always the end of the road. For countless animals, they were merely a way station on a grim journey to the sand of the arena, where their value was measured not in prestige, but in their ability to die for the crowd's entertainment. This transition from pampered pet to public victim was a stark reflection of Roman pragmatism. A young lion cub was a delightful, if perilous, novelty. A full-grown 300-pound adult male was a logistical nightmare, consuming vast quantities of meat and requiring constant, vigilant security. For an aristocrat facing financial difficulties or simply growing bored of his dangerous companion, the solution was readily available. The same networks of traders and merchants who supplied the private menageries also had direct contracts with the officials who organized the public games, the ludi. An animal could be sold back into the system, its value instantly converted from a long-term luxury expense into a one-time payment for a spectacular death. The most common destination was the venatio or wild beast hunt, a morning event that preceded the gladiatorial contest in the amphitheater. Here, the very attributes that made an animal a prized possession, its exotic origin, its fearsome strength, its beautiful hide became the reasons for its execution. Leopards and lions from North Africa, bears from the forests of Germania, and even the occasional ostrich or giraffe were released into the arena to be hunted by professional bestiarii, or in more elaborate spectacles, pitted against each other in violent, unnatural conflicts. The crowd would roar with delight at the sight of a bull fighting a bear or a pack of dogs being set upon a leopard. The death of a beautiful, rare animal was not a tragedy, it was the highlight of the show, a testament to Roman dominance over the wild world. For the elite who donated these animals, it was the ultimate act of public relations. Known as editors, these wealthy citizens, and especially aspiring politicians, would finance entire games to gain popular favor. Donating a dozen lions or a rare tiger was a far more memorable gesture than simply giving out bread. It was a spectacular display of both wealth and generosity, saying to the people, "I have the resources to bring you the most exotic creatures on earth, and the magnanimity to offer them for your amusement." The animal that had once been a private symbol of power became a public sacrifice to the crowd's appetite for wonder and violence, its death serving to enhance its former owner's political standing. Perhaps the most poignant and unsettling aspect of this practice was the fate of tamed animals. There are accounts from historians like Cassius Dio of creatures that had been pets, trained to perform tricks or even eat from their owner's hand, being forced into the arena. One can only imagine the confusion and terror of a bear that had been raised in captivity, suddenly thrust into the blinding sun and deafening noise of the Colosseum to face spears and snarling dogs. This was the darkest inversion of the human-animal bond in the Roman world. The trust that had been carefully built over years was betrayed in a single, brutal afternoon for the sake of spectacle, a stark reminder that for all the affection that might have existed, these animals ultimately remained possessions, and disposable ones at that. This cycle of life and death encapsulates the profound contradiction at the heart of Rome's relationship with the natural world. It was a culture capable of genuine wonder and appreciation for animal intelligence and beauty, yet also capable of staggering brutality and waste. The same individual who wept for a sycamore eel might later cheer as 100 lions were slaughtered in the games. An animal could be a cherished companion, a sacred symbol, and a public victim, its value constantly shifting based on the whims and needs of its human masters. The exotic pet trade was not a separate entity from the blood sports of the arena. They were two sides of the same coin, a unified system of exploitation that stretched from the farthest corners of the empire to the blood-soaked sand at its very heart. These incredible stories of private menageries and jeweled eels might sound like exaggerated tales from ancient historians, but we don't have to rely on text alone to know they were true. The Romans left behind a stunning array of physical evidence that makes this bizarre history tangible. Stepping away from the pages of Pliny and Seneca, we can walk through the ruins of their homes and literally see the world of exotic pets frozen in time. The most vivid proof comes from the breathtaking mosaics that adorn the floors of wealthy villas. In the House of the Faun in Pompeii, one famous mosaic depicts a fantastical scene of a monkey dressed as a charioteer, riding on the back of a partridge. It's a whimsical, almost cartoonish image that speaks volumes about how these animals were integrated into the Roman imagination, not just as possessions, but as characters in their domestic world. Even more striking are the mosaics from North Africa, which often show detailed hunting scenes. Here, cheetahs are depicted not as wild beasts to be feared, but as valuable hunting companions, straining at leashes held by their handlers, their spotted coats meticulously rendered in countless tiny tiles. This isn't just art, it's a direct window into a reality where big cats were tools for leisure, their power and beauty harnessed for human sport. Beyond these intricate pictures, the very bones of the animals themselves tell a powerful story. Archaeologists excavating the garden of a luxurious villa in Rome made a startling discovery: the complete skeleton of a Barbary macaque monkey. This wasn't a random find. The skeleton was unearthed near what was clearly a small, decorative enclosure. The position of the bones suggested the animal had lived there for some time, dying a natural death rather than being sacrificed or eaten. This single, silent skeleton is incontrovertible proof of a deeply personal relationship. Someone in that household cared for that monkey, fed it, and likely laughed at its antics. In other digs, particularly around the sites of grand country estates, archaeologists have found the remains of fallow deer and other hoofed animals that are not native to Italy, their bones showing no signs of butchering for meat. This points directly to the existence of those elaborate game parks, the vivaria, where these creatures were kept purely for the pleasure of looking at them. Their value was in their life, not their death. Even the smaller, more mundane artifacts add crucial layers to our understanding. Elaborate bronze collars, too large for any dog and often intricately decorated with engravings, have been found in excavations. While some may have been for large hunting dogs, others are of a size and design that strongly suggests they were meant for leopards or cheetahs, a physical remnant of the chains that bound these predators to their wealthy owners. Furthermore, intricate carvings on sarcophagi, ivory panels, and even everyday pottery often feature exotic creatures: a parrot perched on a stand, a peacock fanning its tail. These motifs were so common they became part of the decorative vocabulary of the elite. This tells us that these animals weren't hidden away, they were proudly displayed, their images woven into the very fabric of daily life and even commemorated in death. Together, this evidence, the art, the bones, the artifacts, forms an indisputable mosaic of its own. It proves that the written accounts were not mere fantasy. This bizarre and extravagant world of exotic pet ownership was a real, vibrant, and integral part of the Roman elite's identity, a testament written not just in ink, but in tile, bone, and bronze. So how exactly did a tiger from the depths of an Indian jungle end up chained in a Roman senator's garden? The journey was less a simple transaction and more a sprawling, brutal operation, a supply chain of suffering that stretched across thousands of miles and depended on a shadowy network of specialists, each playing a perilous role in delivering living contraband to the heart of the empire. It began not with a wealthy Roman placing an order, but with a team of experienced hunters on the fringes of the known world, in the forests of Syria, the deserts of North Africa, or the river deltas of India. Local tribesmen and professional trappers who knew the land and the habits of its creatures were the first crucial link. These men risked their lives daily, using pitfalls, heavy nets, and sometimes just sheer courage to capture animals like leopards and lions alive, and more importantly, unharmed enough to still be valuable. A dead tiger was worthless, a living, breathing one was a potential fortune. Once captured, the animal would enter the hands of specialized traders and merchants who operated along the established Roman trade routes. These were not typical merchants dealing in spices or silk. They dealt exclusively in living, often furious cargo. They possessed the specific knowledge of how to temporarily contain and pacify these creatures for the initial stages of travel, often using crude wooden cages on ox carts to move them from the interior to coastal ports. The real nightmare, however, began at the water's edge. The Mediterranean Sea, the lifeblood of Roman commerce, became a terrifying gauntlet for these animal captives. They were loaded onto standard cargo ships, their cages shoved into dark, rocking holes alongside amphorae of oil and sacks of grain, with no consideration for their well-being. The noise, the constant motion, the terror, and the often appalling conditions were a recipe for disaster. The mortality rate during these sea voyages was catastrophically high. Animals succumbed to stress, dehydration, starvation, and injury in their cramped confines. A storm that was a mere inconvenience for the human crew could be a death sentence for a terrified lion trapped below deck. It's estimated that for every healthy animal that finally arrived at the port of Ostia, several others had perished along the way. This staggering loss was simply factored into the final price, making the survivors exponentially more valuable. Their survival was less about careful stewardship and more about brutal luck. Upon arrival in Italy, the ordeal wasn't over. The animals, now weakened and disoriented, faced a final, jarring overland trek to Rome itself, once again confined to wagons on bumpy roads, their roaring and panic a bizarre announcement of their approach to the city gates. This entire horrific process from trap to villa was a testament to a simple, cruel equation. Roman demand created a market where any suffering was acceptable, and any cost, whether in coin or in lives, was worth paying for the privilege of possession. Yet for all the allure of the leopard and the prestige of the parrot, the relationship between Romans and animals was far more complex than a simple pursuit of the exotic. In the quiet corners of the home, away from the grand menageries, many Romans formed deep bonds with creatures far more common, but no less cherished. These were not symbols of imperial power, but companions valued for their utility, their character, and their place in the very heart of domestic life. Alongside the roaring lions, a much gentler, more familiar story was unfolding, one of weasels napping in laundry baskets and geese following their owners like loyal dogs. Perhaps the most unexpected of these common companions was the weasel. Today we might shudder at the thought, but to a Roman, a weasel was a highly efficient and deeply valued member of the household staff. Their primary role was that of a master pest controller, a tiny, agile hunter tasked with keeping the granaries and living quarters free of mice and rats. This was a critical job in a city where spoiled grain could mean hunger and where rodents carried disease, but for many, the professional relationship blossomed into something more personal. There are accounts from writers like Pliny the Elder of weasels being kept freely indoors, much like cats would be centuries later. They were appreciated for their playful, curious nature and their neat habits. It's not difficult to imagine a Roman child delighting in the antics of a pet weasel, or a matron of the house quietly enjoying the presence of a sleek, efficient little predator that curled up contentedly after a hard day's work. They were functional pets, a seamless blend of working animal and beloved companion, but if the weasel was the efficient mouser, the goose held a place of honor that was almost sacred. The most famous example is enshrined in Roman legend itself, the sacred geese of Juno from the temple on the Capitoline Hill. The story goes that when the Gauls attempted a nocturnal assault on the citadel in the dead of night, it was the frantic honking and flapping of these temple geese that alerted the sleeping Roman defenders, who then repelled the attack. From that moment on, the goose was forever celebrated as a vigilant guardian, a creature whose loyalty and loud alarm had literally saved Rome from catastrophe. This legendary status filtered down into everyday life. Many Roman households kept geese not just for their eggs and meat, but as watch animals. Their excellent hearing and notoriously vocal nature made them better alarm systems than most dogs. They would raise an incredible racket at the approach of any stranger, making them invaluable for security, but again, utility often turned into affection. Geese can form strong, recognizable bonds with humans, following them around and displaying a personality that is both comical and endearing. A Roman might start keeping geese for practical reasons, only to find themselves genuinely fond of their noisy, waddling protectors. This duality, the functional and the familial, extended to other common creatures as well. Dogs, of course, were ubiquitous, from large Molossian guard hounds to small, graceful Maltese-type lapdogs that were the constant companions of wealthy Roman ladies. They were praised for their loyalty and courage, but even more humble animals found their way into Roman affections. Cranes and crows were sometimes kept for their amusing abilities, and songbirds in cages were a common source of entertainment, their music appreciated in courtyards and gardens. The point was that the Roman capacity for bonding with animals wasn't reserved solely for the expensive and the exotic. It existed on a spectrum, from the pragmatic friendship with a weasel to the legendary reverence for a goose, proving that the desire for animal companionship is a human constant, whether the creature at your feet is a rare import from across the sea or a common native just doing its job. This fascination with possessing the living wonders of the world did not die with the fall of the Roman Empire. It simply hibernated, waiting for a new era of wealth and power to awaken it. The Roman elite's model of the private menagerie as the ultimate symbol of global reach became a blueprint for European aristocracy for over 1,000 years, a direct line of influence stretching from the marble villas of the ancient world to the fortified palaces of medieval kings and the ornate gardens of the Renaissance. When Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800, he was consciously reviving the mantle of Roman authority, and that extended to the animals he kept. At his palaces in Aachen and elsewhere, he maintained an elephant, a gift from the Caliph of Baghdad named Abul Abbas, along with monkeys, lions, and bears. This wasn't just a personal hobby, it was a potent political statement to his subjects and rivals, demonstrating that his influence and diplomatic connections stretched to the distant, mysterious courts of the East, much like a Roman emperor receiving tribute from the edges of his domain. Throughout the Middle Ages, the tradition of the royal menagerie became firmly established as a necessary accessory of sovereignty. The Tower of London's menagerie, begun in the 13th century by King John, is one of the most famous examples. It housed a growing collection of animals that were direct gifts from one monarch to another: lions, leopards, a polar bear that was allowed to fish in the Thames, and even an elephant. These creatures were not kept for scientific study, but for the exact same reason the Romans kept them, as living trophies. They were physical proof of diplomatic alliances, military might, and the vast geographic reach of the monarch's influence. To be able to receive and maintain such exotic and dangerous beasts showed that the king commanded the resources and the authority to tame the world's chaos, projecting an image of power that was both awe-inspiring and intimidating to any visitor. The Renaissance period saw this practice explode with a new level of sophistication and explicit reference to classical antiquity. As scholars rediscovered Roman texts and Italian merchants reopened trade routes that had been dormant for centuries, a new wave of exotic animals flooded into Europe. Popes, princes, and bankers, the new elite of the age, saw themselves as the direct heirs to Roman culture and sought to emulate its grandeur in every way. The Roman vivarium was reborn as the Renaissance garden menagerie. The Medici family in Florence maintained a famous collection of lions, and the Vatican had its own menagerie, where the Pope could entertain diplomats by showing off his leopards and elephants, just as a Roman emperor might have done. The message was unchanged: our power is so absolute that we can command the globe to deliver its most fantastic creatures to our doorstep for our personal amusement. This era also saw the Roman practice of using animals as diplomatic currency reach its zenith. The famous voyage of a rhinoceros to Portugal in 1515, a gift from an Indian sultan to the governor of Portuguese India, who then sent it to King Manuel I, is a perfect example. The king, in turn, decided to gift this incredible novelty to Pope Leo X. Though the animal sadly perished in a shipwreck, the entire episode, immortalized in Albrecht Dürer's famous woodcut, was a chain of gift-giving designed to secure political favor and display international prestige, a direct continuation of a Roman governor sending a rare cheetah to a powerful senator. The animal itself was merely the vehicle for a conversation about power and allegiance. Perhaps the most telling evolution was the shift from the medieval menagerie, often a practical and somewhat grim collection of cages, to the Renaissance seraglio, which began to incorporate design elements meant to create a more naturalistic and aesthetically pleasing environment for the animals, albeit still within confines. This reflected the Renaissance ideal of harmonizing art and nature, but the underlying motivation remained deeply Roman: the complete domination and curation of the natural world for the glory of its owner. The exotic pet was, and would remain for centuries, the ultimate flexible status symbol. It could represent military power, scientific curiosity, immense wealth, or divine right, but its core purpose was established forever by the Romans: to make the impossible seem possible, to bring the very edges of the map into one's own garden, and to prove that true authority meant having the whole world quite literally at your command. It's a story that feels both ancient and unsettlingly modern, because if you listen closely, the distant roar of a lion in a Roman peristyle garden doesn't sound all that different from the stories we hear today. The names and places have changed, but the human impulses behind them, the craving for status, the thrill of novelty, the desire to project power, are eerily and perhaps uncomfortably the same. The wealthy Roman who built a marble cage for his leopard is a direct ancestor of the modern individual who keeps a tiger in a concrete pen in their suburban backyard. The technology of captivity has evolved, but the underlying psychology is a mirror across 2,000 years. For the Roman elite, an exotic animal was a physical extension of their reach, a testament to their ability to conquer and command the farthest corners of their world. Today, the motivation is strikingly similar, though the empire is often one of financial or social media influence. The modern private owner of a big cat isn't showcasing control over geographical provinces, but rather a different kind of dominion, immense personal wealth that allows them to bypass laws, a rebellious individualism that flouts regulations, and an online persona built on shock value and exclusivity. Just as a Roman senator's cheetah was a walking flex on his political rivals, a viral video of someone wrestling a bear in their living room is a flex on the entire concept of ordinary, rule-bound life. It screams, the normal rules do not apply to me. The methods of acquisition, while technologically worlds apart, still hinge on a shadowy network of supply and demand that prioritizes the buyer's desire over the animal's welfare. The ancient Romans had their specialized traders and perilous sea voyages. Today, there are online exotic animal markets, roadside zoos acting as breeding mills, and illegal wildlife traffickers operating in the digital shadows. The journey for a tiger cub today might involve less time on a wooden ship and more time in the cramped hold of a truck or the cargo area of a small aircraft, but the stress, fear, and high mortality rates for these animals remain a tragic constant. The commodity is the same, a living being reduced to its novelty value, and the supply chain, though globalized, is just as brutal. And just as the Roman practice had its vocal critics like Seneca, who saw it as a moral sickness, our modern version is scrutinized by animal welfare organizations, ethical biologists, and lawmakers. The arguments against it are virtually identical. It's a profound misdirection of resources, it's inherently dangerous for the owner and the public, and it represents a deep and selfish disrespect for the nature of the animal itself. The ancient Stoics warned that the desire for such spectacles corrupted the soul and weakened the state. Modern critics argue it corrupts our relationship with the natural world and undermines global conservation efforts. The animal that could be protecting its species in the wild is instead wasting away in a backyard cage, its life meaningless beyond being a curiosity for its owner's gratification. Perhaps the most poignant parallel is the ultimate tragic fate that awaits so many of these animals. In ancient Rome, a grown lion that became too expensive or difficult to manage might be sold off to the games for a public execution. Its life, once a symbol of private prestige, would end as a public spectacle. Today, the cycle is sadly familiar. The cute tiger cub that someone could handle and take pictures with grows into a 500-pound carnivore with immense needs and instincts. These animals often end up confiscated by authorities, languishing in overcrowded sanctuaries for the rest of their days, or in the worst cases, euthanized because there is simply no place for them. They are the victims of a disposable mindset, where the initial thrill of ownership evaporates when faced with the crushing reality of responsibility. This enduring fascination reveals something fundamental about power and prestige. It shows that throughout history, for a certain kind of person, simply having wealth is not enough. True status is demonstrated by the ability to possess the seemingly unpossessable, to bend the natural order to one's will, and to display that mastery for others to see. Whether it's an emperor in a toga or an influencer on a screen, the message is identical. Look what I can command. The animal itself is secondary. It is a prop in a much older, much more human drama. But before we get too carried away with images of leopards on leashes and monkeys serving wine, it's crucial to take a step back and separate the historical reality from the layers of myth and sensationalism that have built up over 2,000 years. Ancient historians, while invaluable, often had their own agendas. They were writing to entertain, to moralize, or to flatter their patrons, and a good story frequently took precedence over strict factual accuracy. This is where archaeology becomes our most reliable truth-teller, quietly correcting the record with physical evidence dug from the earth. One of the most persistent and charming legends is the idea that wealthy Romans used tiny monkeys, often described as dining monkeys, as live napkins. The story goes that these trained creatures would scamper across the couches during a feast, diligently wiping the greasy hands of reclining guests. It's a wonderfully bizarre image that perfectly fits our notion of Roman decadence. However, there's a major problem with this tale, a complete lack of evidence. No archaeological dig has ever unearthed the skeleton of a tiny monkey species suitable for such a task in a dining context. More importantly, Roman writers who loved to catalog every detail of extravagant banquets never once mentioned this practice. It seems to be a later invention, a medieval or Renaissance folktale that was projected backward onto the Romans, who were already famous for their excesses. The reality is that Romans used linen napkins, just like many cultures before and since. They had highly sophisticated table manners and service. The idea of replacing a simple cloth with a chaotic, unpredictable, and likely unhygienic primate doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Another area where legend often overshadows fact is in the training of these animals. The ancient sources, particularly those describing the whims of emperors like Elagabalus, speak of lions and tigers that were so thoroughly tamed they could be let loose at parties with their claws removed. While the Romans were skilled handlers, the concept of a completely tamed big cat is a modern misunderstanding of animal behavior. Domestication takes thousands of years of selective breeding. Taming is merely suppressing wild instincts through fear and conditioning, and it is always temporary and unreliable. Removing an animal's claws is a brutal and debilitating procedure that would have almost certainly led to fatal infections in the ancient world. It is far more likely that these stories are dramatic exaggerations. What a Roman handler could achieve was a state of lethargic compliance through constant confinement and ample feeding, creating animals that were passive rather than truly tame. The moment something triggered their deep-seated instincts, a sudden movement, a loud noise, the illusion of control would have shattered in an instant of terrifying violence. Then there are the accounts of truly outlandish spectacles, like the time Emperor Aurelian was said to have paraded a chariot pulled by elephants, followed by a caravan of tigers, giraffes, and other exotic creatures. While the parade itself is documented, the specific details and scale were likely amplified over time. The logistics of assembling such a diverse collection of animals, all behaving perfectly in the chaotic environment of a Roman triumph, stretches credibility. These accounts served a purpose. They were less about reporting fact and more about illustrating the emperor's almost superhuman power to command nature itself. They were propaganda designed to awe the populace and intimidate rivals. The reality was impressive enough. A few elephants or a caged lion would have been stunning to the average citizen. The legend simply took that kernel of truth and built a taller, more magnificent tale upon it. So how do we find the real story? We look to the quiet testimony of archaeology. The discovery of a monkey skeleton in a garden enclosure tells us they were kept, but its context suggests it was a pet or a curiosity, not a servant. The bones of fallow deer on a country estate without butchering marks confirm the existence of game parks, not that they were used for fantastical hunting methods. The mosaics show us cheetahs on leashes, proving they were used for hunting, but they don't show them performing circus tricks. The physical evidence consistently points to a reality that, while still extravagant and often shocking, was grounded in the possible. The Romans were masters of spectacle and engineering, but they were still bound by the limitations of biology, logistics, and the fundamental nature of the wild animals they sought to possess. By listening to the archaeology, we don't diminish their achievements. We simply exchange a cartoonish version of history for one that is far more complex, fascinating, and human. But for those who thought a lion was the peak of extravagance or a monkey the height of whimsy, the Roman elite still had surprises in store. They ventured beyond the conventional menagerie to embrace creatures so utterly bizarre that they pushed the very definition of a pet. Among the most peculiar of these choices was the rock badger or hyrax, a small furry mammal imported from the rocky outcrops of North Africa. To the modern eye, a hyrax looks almost like a large, tailless guinea pig or a plump, overgrown rodent. But in one of nature's most delightful quirks, its closest living genetic relatives are actually the elephant and the manatee. This biological paradox alone would have fascinated the intellectually curious Roman, but its appeal went much deeper. The hyrax was a creature of pure, unadulterated novelty, an animal so far outside the normal experience of an Italian that its very existence was a conversation piece. Its strange, rounded body, its peculiar vocalizations, and its ability to cling to steep rocks made it a living puzzle, a creature that defied easy categorization and thus became the ultimate possession for someone who believed they had seen everything. The process of acquiring a hyrax was a testament to the reach of Roman trade networks. These were not animals that were captured in large numbers for the games. They were specialized orders procured by merchants who knew there was a boutique market for the truly unusual among the patrician class. Transporting them required specific knowledge. They needed well-ventilated crates, a careful diet, and a steady supply of water for their journey across the Mediterranean. Their value was not in their ferocity or their beauty, but in their sheer obscurity. To have a hyrax scurrying about a specially built rockery in one's garden was to demonstrate a connoisseur's knowledge of the natural world, a statement that one's taste was so refined that common exotics were no longer sufficient. It was the ancient equivalent of collecting rare art. The value was in the story, the rarity, and the ability to be the only person on your street, or perhaps in the entire city, who owned one. Yet the hyrax was not alone in the gallery of Roman oddities. From the dense forests of the east came another, far more disturbing pet, the slow loris. This small, large-eyed primate moves with a deliberate, ghostly grace, and its nocturnal nature gives it an aura of mystery. The Romans, always drawn to the mysterious, were captivated by its unblinking gaze and gentle appearance. However, the relationship with the slow loris reveals a darker side of the exotic pet trade, one that mirrors troubling practices still seen today. To make these creatures docile and handleable for their owners, traders would often perform a cruel procedure, illegally analogous to the declawing of big cats, but infinitely more barbaric, the removal of their teeth. This brutal act, intended to neutralize their potentially venomous bite, left the animal defenseless, chronically vulnerable, and in constant pain, all for the sake of making it a safer living toy for a wealthy Roman. This practice underscores a brutal truth beneath the veneer of sophistication. The welfare of the animal was always secondary to the whimsy and safety of the owner. And for those seeking a pet that combined raw, earthy power with a touch of martial prestige, some looked not to the deserts of Africa or the jungles of India, but to the forests right outside their city walls. There are accounts, particularly from the late Republic, of wealthy individuals keeping tamed wild boars. This was an audacious choice even by Roman standards. A boar is not a docile creature. It is a powerful, intelligent, and notoriously aggressive animal, revered as one of the most challenging and dangerous quarries for a hunter. To capture a young boar and attempt to raise it in captivity was an enormous risk, yet for a certain type of Roman, that was precisely the point. A well-trained dog showed loyalty. A tamed boar showed absolute mastery. It was a testament to the owner's courage, patience, and sheer force of will. To be able to walk alongside such a formidable native beast, to have it respond to commands, was to demonstrate a dominance over the local wilderness that was both intimate and profound. It was a statement that resonated with an older, more rustic Roman ideal of strength and harmony with nature, albeit a nature perfectly subdued to human command. Each of these animals, the paradoxical hyrax, the tragic loris, the formidable boar, proves that the Roman drive to possess the natural world was limitless, constantly seeking new frontiers of the bizarre to conquer and display. And so the sprawling, chaotic, and often contradictory world of the Roman exotic pet comes into focus. It was a world built on a single driving force, the insatiable human hunger for prestige. Every leopard in a marble cage, every talking raven on its perch, every bizarre hyrax in a custom rockery, was a testament to the insane lengths the wealthy would go to set themselves apart. This wasn't merely about ownership. It was a complex language of power spoken not with words, but with living, breathing creatures. It was a declaration that its owner possessed the global connections to pull a piece of distant wilderness from the very edges of the map, and the sheer audacity to place it squarely in the center of their domestic life. The financial cost was astronomical, the logistical hurdles were immense, and the personal danger was ever present. Yet for the elite, no price was too high. The risk was the entire point. It proved that their wealth and influence were so vast they could afford to gamble with the most dangerous and unpredictable elements of the natural world. This story is forever woven from two inseparable threads: a genuine, awe-struck fascination and a deeply embedded capacity for cruelty. The Romans were not simple brutes. They were capable of profound observation and appreciation. They marveled at the intelligence of a raven, the vibrant beauty of a parrot, the serene grace of a gazelle in a private park. They formed bonds with their monkeys and wept for their moray eels. Yet this appreciation existed alongside a chilling pragmatism. The same animal that was a cherished companion one day could be sold to the games for a bloody execution the next. The trust built with a tamed bear could be betrayed for an afternoon spectacle. This duality is the core of the Roman paradox, a culture that could venerate a snake as a household god and in the same breath watch hundreds of its kin be slaughtered in the arena. The animal was never truly seen as a being with its own right to exist. It was a vessel, a canvas upon which the Roman elite projected their own ambitions, fears, and desires for dominance. The legacy of this practice did not fade with the marble of their villas. It echoes through the centuries, a blueprint for power that European royalty and aristocracy would follow for over a millennium. The menageries of Charlemagne, the royal collection at the Tower of London, the ornate gardens of Renaissance popes, all were direct descendants of the Roman model. They understood, just as a wealthy patrician did, that possessing a living piece of the exotic was the ultimate symbol of command, a way to physically demonstrate that your authority stretched to the farthest horizons. This ancient desire to possess the rare and the wild has evolved, but it has never truly disappeared. It persists in the modern world, in the private collections of big cats, in the illegal wildlife trade, and in our continued fascination with animals that defy our ordinary experience. Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought, a question that bridges the gap between their world and ours. The ancient Romans, in their choice of pet, were making a profound statement about themselves, their wealth, their power, their place in the universe. So what does our choice of pets say about us today? Is the beloved rescue dog a testament to our compassion and desire for companionship? Is the meticulously bred show cat a symbol of our appreciation for beauty and pedigree? Or does the modern desire for hairless cats, designer reptiles, and exotic hybrids reveal a similar, though perhaps more subtle, yearning for uniqueness and status? We may no longer keep lions, but the underlying human impulses, the search for connection, the need for identity, and the desire to showcase a part of ourselves to the animals we welcome into our homes, those remain powerfully and fascinatingly the same. So the next time you look at your own pet, whether it's a dog, a cat, or something more unique, consider the incredible journey of that relationship, a bond that stretches back millennia. It reminds us that the desire to connect with the animal world is a deeply human impulse, one that the Romans took to its most spectacular and often shocking extreme. Their story is a powerful mirror, reflecting our own complex relationship with nature, a mix of awe, domination, compassion, and curiosity. What do you think was the most bizarre pet a wealthy Roman could own? Was it the lion, a literal king of beasts pacing a marble courtyard, the sacred snake, a slithering connection to the divine, or perhaps the moray eel, gliding through its saltwater pond, adorned with jeweled earrings? Let us know your favorite in the comments below. We love reading your thoughts and diving into these discussions with you. If you enjoyed this journey into the strange and spectacular world of ancient Rome, please show your support by giving this video a like. It truly helps us out. And to make sure you don't miss our next exploration into history's greatest mysteries, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications. There are so many more fascinating stories waiting to be uncovered, and we can't wait to share them with you.